Hello, everybody. Now, a bit of an interesting change of pace because already this year we've talked about Chris's views towards transgenderism. However, what we haven't necessarily talked about is Chris's attitude towards other people who are transgender. Now, with that being said, there's without wanting us to say that it's going to start splicing into the topic about hermaphrodites, which I'm not entirely sure how much of a conversation you can have about stuff like that, but let's see what we can do, shall we? I truly feel that women should only be portrayed as they truly are individually: strong, powerful, smart, beautiful, and equal as human beings. And when anyone draws a true woman with a dick, they have broken not only the legal law, but God and Jesus' law to the extent. But I digress. Chris on the Solitude Girls website expressing his disgust towards women being drawn with penises. As if, again, they're actually real, but are we going to be led to believe Chris knows or even cares, and I am censoring that out. There was a time before I realised mine being a female soul trapped in a male-born body when I was homophobic. But I became aware. Oh, I bet you did, Chris. I'm sure. I am absolutely sure you became aware of this, of these kind. But I came aware of these kind, open-hearted people, and I learned how understanding and compassionate they are, and with that, losing the homophobia, I felt more at peace with myself with those around me. This is apparently Chris after transitioning. It seems as if Chris just dropped his rhetoric eventually. I'm going to say very, very eventually. Now, hermaphroditism is the biological condition where an organism possesses reproductive organs and or gametes of both sexes. The term once also was also used to refer to people who were intersex. Chris, however, specifically applied the term hermaphrodite to refer to any person that he perceived as being female or of an ambiguous gender, but with a penis and secondary female sexual characteristics such as breasts. This included transgender women that hadn't received bottom surgery, as well as intersex people that he perceived as being female. In essence, Chris used the term the same way some people refer to such people as she-males, dick-girls, or futa. Like with a lot of other things, Chris's understanding of trans and intersex people came from the media he's consumed. What a surprise! His initial understanding of such concepts mirrored those of many other people during the late 2000s and early 2010s. Chris had seemingly conflated transgenderism with intersexuality, believing that both terms referred to the same thing. Chris is an idiot. Chris, more often than not, used the term hermaphrodite as a pejorative towards trans women, under the fear that they too can make him gay. Due to their supposed ability to subvert his straightness, during the classic era, Chris was also noted for being peeved by his female characters being portrayed as hermaphrodites, being portrayed with penises, or as trans women. For these reasons, the way Chris used the term can be thought of as the transgender equivalent of, well, the uh, the derivative term to describe people who are homosexuals. Chris has also used this term, as well as transvestite and ladyman, as demeaning terms towards trans women that he didn't deem authentic, and refused to respect the identities of such persons. Now, these past attitudes of Chris's behaviour, however, are far more overshadowed amongst the quick sphere by his recent, more vocal support for trans people on social media. Chris seemingly used the term intersex to refer to the same thing, but in a less derogatory manner. Question mark? Using the term on himself when he began transitioning, as well as for the characters Rosechu and Sylvana, both of whom had penises at one point or another. Whether this was because Chris was forced into doing it, or whether or not Chris just gave in or just decided to do it, is a little bit uncertain. Past transphobia. I do not care much for transgender people or hermaphrodites, but I do not discriminate them as people. Also, Chris, I have given thought about the transgenders and transvestites. I do not feel comfortable with them. Dicks are dicks. I do not care about them except for my own. I mean, no one's saying you have to, Chris, but you know what? It's strange that Chris is saying this as though for some reason, transgender people are going to be, writers' reign towards. Like, what exactly does Chris have anyway that, transgender people would want to get along, period, with Chris? I don't know where Chris is getting this off. Though it has taken him years to fully articulate his views on transgender issues and topics, Chris has also shown an aversion towards trans people, particularly trans women, viewing them as something that he could potentially subvert his straightness around that time. Similar to his past attitudes towards homosexuals, considering his distaste for being seen as gay himself, as well as him expressing his longing for vagina, as you do, it would only make sense that at the time he be repulsed by the idea of a man being attracted to what he viewed as another man possessing or posing as a woman, or a woman having a penis. Theories which Chris has proven correct many, many times. Well, technically, did Chris prove that, or did the trolls make it so? Also, like with gay people, or as far as Chris is concerned, Chris believed that hermaphrodites had the ability and desire to make him gay. When telling people to play with toys that would be appropriate for the opposite gender in order to understand them better in his infamous future message video, Chris also alluded to believing that when one forgets their true original gender, they would wind up becoming gay themselves if they strayed away too much from their assigned gender at birth. Whatever, Chris. Well, honestly, whatever. Also, keep in mind while you're playing with those things, you should keep in mind of what your true original gender is, because it's like you worry about that girl you want to take on a date, young man, or like otherwise you feel more comfortable to approach that boy by just saying hello. You've been checking out from a distance, young lady, and hopefully in due time or now, each and every one of you will stay straight. Surprisingly, this is not not. I don't think. Thankfully, zero people have chosen to take Chris's words seriously. Neither does this whole future message turn Chris into an irresistible Casanova circa Johnny Sins anytime soon. By the way, this was Chris after telling men to play with My Little Pony dolls and women to play with Transformers. And I have to absolutely censor this part as well. He has also claimed that he even found the prospect of a woman who was seducing him being hermaphrodite worse than if he was being catfished by a man, as evidenced when he called out Shimon Sonozaki, where he questioned if she was a pretty woman before bringing up the possibility of her being a man, or worse, a hermaphrodite. Ironically, Chris had also stated that he'd rather get a sex change operation before ever becoming gay, which led to questioning from trolls. Chris has also seemed to agree to the notion of transgender women being seen as authentic women, but was just discomforted by them. Chris's discomfort with hermaphrodites was exploited and became a well-known means to troll him on several occasions, usually by depicting some of his female characters as transgender, or in one case, attempting to hook him up with a trans woman. Liquid Chris has even parodied Chris's use of the term hermaphrodite in one of his videos. A heavy target towards this method of trolling was the character Rosechu, who was depicted countless times by trolls as being born male due to being designed with a male Raichu tail, putting the straightness of Sonichu himself into question. Trolls have noticed that all instances of this made Chris particularly angry, and which the trolls exploited at nauseum. When Chris had first discovered his ED page and noticed Rosechu drawn with a penis, he tried to dispel the rumours of her being a gay man by creating an entire episode for the Rosechu comics, the infamous episode 17. In that episode, Chris drew Rosechu naked on many occasions, putting great emphasis on the fact that she had a vagina. This, of course, wouldn't stop trolls from continuing to troll Chris in this manner, making more art of Rosechu with the offending appendage, and declaring Rosechu as a trans symbol, in order to anger Chris further. Chris's insistence to the contrary had only made Rosechu having a pickle to become more of a meme amongst those aware of Chris's story. Chris was manipulated by Sarah May to edit a drawing that he made with Rosechu wearing a strap-on dildo, changing it so that she had a penis instead, with Sarah claiming that he can get his website back if he did. She, of course, was lying through her teeth. Chris has also received a number of replies in the mailbag praising him for his supposed portrayal of Rosechu as a trans woman, leading to one of the most well-known instances of Chris's wrath. And also, Rosechu has always been a woman. If you look on page 3 of book number 1, it says right there that Raichu was a girl, quote unquote, girl Raichu. And Sonichu has been straight the whole time. He's always been straight. Rosechu's always been a woman. Ugh. Now, as I said before, there's a surprisingly very simple way out of all of this, because apparently the Pokemon games hadn't yet established what distinguishing features a Raichu could have, specifically their tail, to determine whether they're female or not. All Chris had to do was just make this correction, and literally nobody would have cared. Nobody would have brought to mention this up again. Why Chris did not think to do that, I have no idea, but as far as we're concerned, yeah, Chris had a very, very, very simple and easy way out of this, and Chris decided to do everything to make this harder. For seemingly no reason whatsoever, it turns out. They might mention this again. Despite Chris trying to claim that he always intended Rosechu to be born a girl Raichu, even slapping together a collage to try and claim that she was born with a blunt tail, trolls have pointed the obvious out. Seeing through Chris's obvious lie, Chris had deleted such comments and that point this out, adding more suspicion. Despite all efforts Chris had made to deny Rosechu being trans, one fan admitted the obvious and told him that all he had to do was mention how in his world this gender difference never existed, and Chris rolled with this. Chris also created the character Sylvana Rosechu, who was originally a female Rosechu that has the ability to shapeshift. In Sonichu issue 8, Chris introduces the law that Count Graduon had granted her the ability to shapeshift under the condition that she was to be born intersex, and loses her ability to give birth. From there, she was able to give herself a vagina or penis at will, often while seducing other characters. Trolls and observers have speculated that Chris gave her this ability as a way of symbolizing his frustration with all the times he's been catfished by trolls, especially when she trolled Chris in Solitude issue 10, though this is conjecture at best. Chris said himself that trolls had inspired him to make her a hermaphrodite, that Count Graduon had forced Chris to make her have a penis under said troll influence, and proclaimed he intended for Sylvana to be all-female when she seduced him. This indicates that it is more likely he was manipulated in some way to make her like this, exploiting Chris's stressor. Chris said that Sylvana was his least favourite character to work with for this reason, and also stated that fans can draw her naked just so long as she's drawn with a vagina. The infamous drawing of Sylvana masturbating, which I had to censor out earlier, was also created as a commission from Sarah May, bribing Chris to do it to get his website back. One of the most infamous examples of Chris's former transphobia was his encounter with the troll sweetheart Bailey J. in the Wikipedia's mailbag. There, the troll behind the Bailey persona had seemingly taken note of the other instances of Chris's being catfished, and decided to put Chris's self-proclaimed straightness to the test. In the first message that she sent to Chris, Bailey claims that she had a hard time finding men to fall in love with. After Chris replied, calling her cute and pretty, she sent nude photos of herself to Chris, revealing that she had a penis. Oh my god, are you really a hermaphrodite? I'm sorry, but that naughty picture just really shocked me and made me want to throw up. You do have a pretty face, but what happened just now is just like that movie, The Crying Game, or that Thanksgiving episode of The Cleveland Show. I've never seen that episode of The Cleveland Show, and quite frankly, I'm not really. I know what The Crying Game is. I'm surprised Chris knows what that is, to be fair. But whatever, you know what? Chris finds new ways to surprise me every day. Chris showed very conflicting feelings at the revelation, still calling Bailey pretty, but also being unnerved at her being trans. Chris then apologized to Bailey when she expressed having her feelings hurt, and in the same post, Chris also rambles a couple of times about being straight. As a sign by God, obviously being defensive about the previous comments he made towards her. Several other trolls took note of Chris's reaction to Bailey, as well as a portion of Rosechu issue 10, where Chris is seen getting trolled by Sylvana by being seduced by her, disguised as Meg Griffin, and they began asking him more questions about hermaphrodites, in future mailbags, such as in mailbag 37. In mailbag 39, another troll asked Chris if he had sex with Sylvana, who at the time was portrayed with a penis, and asked him if he'd want to have sex with a she-male. Chris angrily replied that he never had sex with her and that he'd never have sex with a hermaphrodite, proclaiming that he had no intentions of retconning her ability to become one. Second, to answer your questions, 1. No, I did not have sex with Sylvana, only making out when Sylvana takes the form of all-female individual. Its dick is gone. 2. I would never care to have sex with a hermaphrodite. In Mailbag 43, another troll suggests the idea of Bubbles Rosechu being a trans woman after she claimed she'd hit that following her name being changed to Kitty in the Asperger interpretation of the chaotic combo. Chris had deleted this statement and replaced it with the two other ones, calling Alec Benson Leary's recreation of the characters unapproved. Even after he began transitioning himself and requesting that other people respect his new identity, Chris has still shown several instances of transphobia. When he tried to expose Jack Thaddeus, he was tricked into believing that Jack was the lolcow Ahuvia Rotrem Harel, who was also transgender. He used this fact as something to expose him for, as well as making fun of him going through a sex change operation in order to chase after men. Even after Chris wishes Jack luck with the operation, he also claims that he won't be a part of Fandom and calls him, well, a slur, basically. This is all the while Chris is trying to do his impression of that one scene in Basic Instinct. Yeah, you know the one. Chris also refers to trans women as fake women, and uses the term, I'm not using that word either, a couple of times. In a 23rd of April 2014 conversation that he had with the troll gal pal, Love You Long Time, in the conversation, which is about his love quest and the woman he's chased and had to sort through, he still expresses the belief that these women still have the intention of chasing after men and making him gay. During his encounters with Francine Uzo, Chris was noted for several instances of gatekeeping. In one of the videos addressing them, Chris expressing feeling angry at her, declaring that she is no woman, claiming they have no female soul, and calling them by their male name for this reason. Anyway, aside from that, I'm really pissed off at Jeff. I'm going by his male name because he is no woman. No female soul whatsoever, regardless, places Amiibo off camera once more, regardless of the fact that having his balls chopped off in Falasto sounding like a high-pitched choir boy now. Fascinating, Chris, and I'm gonna have to censor this out as well. When Francine had been disturbingly unofficial, distributing unofficial Rosechu merchandise, and believing that Francine had created the fan game Christian Western Genre's Adult Chronicles, Chris tried doxing her and calling her a lady man. And to think, Chris doesn't really need to be worried about people making him gay because again, I can't see gay men finding Chris attractive in any way whatsoever. What have you got, Chris? An original character? What have you got, Chris? Soddle, that's what you've got. Before his transition, Chris tried to maintain his straightness by acting like what he thought a stereotypical man acted like, showing insecurity of his more effeminate traits. This was likely a result of the aforementioned fact that he believed that one straying away too much from their assigned gender made them gay, which meant that Chris believed that he's proving to the trolls that he's gay by showcasing his femininity, and so took every possible opportunity, as you do, while recording himself to subvert it by feigning masculinity. When Chris was forced to admit that he was gay by a group of trolls, he held up an action figure of Optimus Prime, who he deemed to be a symbol of masculinity throughout the entire video. That'll convince them, Chris. Chris had also greatly exaggerated his physical prowess, usually to appear more powerful than his trolls or to impress his gal pals. These attempts included, but not limited to, him recording himself performing feats of strength, threatening his trolls, or outright exaggerating and or lying about the sports he was proficient at, in online dating sites or towards said gal pals. In the comics, Chris also often portrayed himself as a barrel-chested hero and oftentimes appeared muscular when he was shirtless. Despite all of Chris's efforts, though, they were completely overshadowed by his penchant for cross-dressing, something he was very defensive about. The earliest known instance of this recorded is with the muscle bra, which Chris has stated that all men should wear muscle bras to cover their chests by law. Being uncomfortable with seeing the chest of a man, at the time, Chris appeared to refer to such coverings as a muscle bra, due to the masculine connotation that came with it. Not wanting to making it appear he's prompting men to wear women's clothes. Chris then bought himself one of these bras to control the bouncing of his moves, and came to enjoy it. On the 28th of April 2011, Sir Shaktito also leaked a set of photos, which highlighted Chris's eventual gender transition. Even while this facade was on its last legs, Chris still tried to assure people that he was a heterosexual man who had just got in touch with his feminine side. Chris, after transitioning, has ironically become one of the things he once winced at the thought of. However, from doing this, his gender dysphoria became much more apparent, and he had an inverse perspective on this presentation. Now wanting to eliminate all masculine traits of himself, including his penis, Chris only appears to view those who have a vagina as fully female, regardless of their chromosomes. This also seemed to be a driving force of his that led to him taking such drastic measures on himself, and expressing self-loathing on himself for being born male. Chris has also expressed interest in getting gender reassignment surgery on many occasions, up until he eventually did. Trans men. Would you date a transgender person? As long as she was born female and was still female, or a tomboy. So the answer is no then, Chris. Just say no. Overall, Chris has always had a much better relationship with trans men, even respecting their new identities and pronouns on practically all occasions. However, this could be because, even after transitioning, He viewed them as simply butch gal pals, showing the same possessive behaviours and entitlement towards them as he does with any other gal pal. Sometime in late 2014, when Chris was asked if he would date a transgender person, he replied that he would, only on the condition that they were biologically female, likely in reference to them being a trans man. When asked if he'd do the same to a trans man who got surgery, however, he denied this, stating having seen images of trans men getting reassignment surgery and not liking the results. I have image Googled females who went under the surgery. I do not like the results at all. Also, can I just say it's also very, very like Chris to start viewing people specifically from a physical point of view, like as if they've got to be physically attractive before anything else. I know Chris on occasion says that's not true, but why do other people say it then? If it's not true, Chris, then why are we not convinced? Is what I'm trying to get at. Another prominent example of Chris showing his mindset in his interactions is with the voice actor Vinyl Scratch, also known as No Whacking. Before No Whacking's transition, Chris replied to many of his tweets, especially when he started posting about dating on his Twitter. When talking about him, Chris went on long tangents about his online life and his experiences with trolls and weens. Weens, led by Michael Hurties, then tried to convince No Whacking to block Chris, which caused Chris to believe that they were responsible for No Whacking blocking him. Chris continued to try contacting him through multiple sock puppet accounts, even after No Whacking's transition. Chris still tried to redeem himself in his eyes during BronyCon 2018, presenting him with his comics and toys, to which he showed no interest at all. Now, even after all of this, Chris still tries to keep in contact with the same voice actor to this day. Meanwhile, Chris has shown similar attitudes towards the TT Squad, a group of 3 trolls that Chris had befriended, 2 of which being trans men. During their interactions with Chris, Lucas talked about Chris's lack of boundaries around them being rapey, mirroring his inappropriate advances towards some of his gal pals. After they left him abruptly, he had shown bewilderment at this, and has since then tried to regain contact towards them as late as September 2019. He gave up shortly afterwards, and I think that suited everybody just fine. Shifting stances on trans people. Nowadays, despite his far more obscure history with regards to trans people, Chris is widely known as a trans advocate, making many social media posts about the rights of trans people and implementing trans characters in his comics. He showed such sentiments since at least 2015, a year after he openly transitioned. On social media, Chris was noted for oftentimes agreeing with prominent transgender figures. Before officially transitioning when Chris had declared himself a tomgirl, his stance towards his characters being transgender also shifted more positively. The most prominent example of this being Robbie, formerly Robbie, now Roberta, who was initially written as being the youngest son of Rosechu and Rosechu. Chris decided to write an about Robbie's transition in Rosechu issue 12, making it the main focus of the story to be or not a tomgirl, which showed his decision to do so during his childhood, his evolution, and eventual transition. He similarly made Sarah Rosechu and Christine Rosechu into tomboys. He also showed his support to the trans community by starting up a new band, Robbie, Sonny, and the Tomgirls, consisting of the 3 of them. On the 16th of April 2015, Chris had found an article on a recent episode of Ellen DeGeneres' talk show, never heard of it, that dealt with transgender rights. There, Chris states that trans people should use whatever bathrooms best aligns with their gender identities. Oh dear God. Chris also follows LGBT news, which sometimes covers transgender related topics. In May of 2017, he commented on a post from then which linked to a theoretical article about a possible surgery for trans women to become pregnant. Aha, I knew it. I can eventually be a mother. Little has been noted about what Chris has done to pursue this, or whether or not he even cited this as being truthful. In a 26 July 2017 tweet, during Donald Trump's first presidency, Chris reacts to Trump's ban for trans people in the military, comparing Trump to Scrooge McDuck from DuckTales. At Real Donald Trump, how dare you? Quell your phobias and paranoias already. Cheapness is a terrible trait too. Invest back into what you've taken from. Also, you will never be as rich as Scrooge McDuck, because aside from the money, he actually gets love and respect from his family and friends. Whatever that means. Being a self proclaimed lesbian trans woman, Trump's anti trans policy would only naturally serve as being one of the several things that made Chris despise him. Even when a lot of his other policies during his first term didn't affect Chris personally, Chris had also blocked Caitlyn Jenner, a transgender media personality and athlete, on the 7th of November 2024 due to her supporting Trump, who had around that time expressed plans to pass anti trans legislature and afterwards signed executive orders that affected transgender people at a much larger scale. Outside of Rosechu, Rosechu and Rosechu's children, Chris has gradually come to terms with Rosechu being depicted as a hermaphrodite, albeit somewhat hesitantly at first. This was ironically due to troll interference, primarily from the Idea Guys. On the 6th of December 2017, Chris confirmed that she was indeed born male, and that she had gotten a sex change operation prior to the events of Rosechu Issue 8, allowing her to birth children. One of the Idea Guys explained how they were able to convince Chris of this. I pretended to be both Rosechu and Rosechu, who borrowed my computer. All it took was a little knowledge of Rosechu and Chris believing he's talking to his children. Basically, Rosechu admitted it when she told Chris she evolved from a male Raichu. Following this, Chris made a poll on Twitter asking fans if Rosechu should remain a trans woman, or get retconned back to being a woman at birth. More than half of the fans voted for Rosechu to be trans, which caused Chris to delete the poll. Chris finally fully accepted Rosechu being trans, portraying her as such in Rosechu Issue 0 HD. Chris also appeared to be on good terms with transgender Twitch streamer Keffels, infamous for a feud with the Kiwi Farms, which in itself used to be a site that focused solely on Chris. Keffels decided to get herself involved in Christery, likely with Chris reaching out to her. Chris's relationship with Keffels can be seen with posts from him that have been uncovered in the Catboy Ranch Discord server, as well as an interview she had with Chris. Prior to this, Chris had expressed his opinions on Keffels' feud with the Farms in Volume 8 of the Goddess Logs. There, he rants about No attacking her immensely and took solace in the site temporarily being taken down. On the 5th of February 2025, Chris has expressed favour towards trans women playing in women's sports, posting a GIF that prompted this on Twitter and replying to a post that pointed out that Trump made it illegal. Quite frankly, I'm a little bit worn out after reading all of that. Also, notes. 1. It should be noted that the T word wasn't universally recognized as a slur at the time, and instead a common term for trans people. This conversation was also before he openly transitioned, where he also referred to himself as the T word. Is that bad? I don't know. But some people would say, yeah, it's still quite bad. It's like an aeroplane without wings. Um, the only thing I feel like I can say, I suppose, to sum all this up, is that Chris goes from disliking them to tolerating them to kind of embracing them to, well, Chris still sort of retreating to his little distance, if you will. So it makes me wonder whether or not Chris has sort of made a mistake, because at the end of the day, whether you were born male, whether you were born female, whether you've transitioned, whether you want to transition, whether you feel as if you are still in the same body, or whether you were born in the wrong body, you are still the same person on the inside. It's your personality you can transition, that can actually change, but change it for the better. Do it for the right reason. Do it to make yourself better, and I think you'll be all right. So with all that being said and done, because there was a lot to go over here, I didn't realize we'd be here for such a long time, but I'll see all of you guys again at the next station. So all aboard!